Welcome back to the deep dive. Imagine a foundational digital revolution built on these radical ideas of decentralization, open source principles. And now it's facing this really intense internal struggle. What happens when the very vision, the vision of its creators is challenged so violently, not by outside forces, but, well, by a conflict that's just raging within its own community? Today, we're embarking on a journey into a story that, well, according to the material we're looking at, feels less like a simple technical disagreement
Right.
and much more like a full-blown civil war,
Yeah.
a fight for the very soul of Bitcoin. So our mission today is to really explore this pretty dramatic narrative. We're diving deep into one specific argument, a perspective that suggests a major internal conflict isn't just brewing, it's already boiling over within the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Mm.
And this isn't just about lines of code, is it? It's about the fundamental nature of data being stored on the blockchain, the implications of a highly controversial software update, and some, frankly, quite serious allegations of corruption being leveled against key figures.
Precisely. Yeah, for this deep dive, we are dissecting a critical perspective. And yes, it's definitely polemic. Our lens today is Crowder, coming from his piece, which is, well, compelling, maybe even incendiary, titled Bitcoin Civil War, The Battle Against Spam and Corruption. Our goal here is to meticulously unpack Crowder's central argument, look at all his supporting points, examine the specific claims he's making, the evidence he presents, and the profound implications he highlights for anyone who's invested in any way in Bitcoin's future. We're essentially laying out his case for you, the whole comprehensive argument, so you can really grasp the nuances of this intensely charged dispute.
And why now? Why are we digging into this right now? Because this isn't like ancient history. It's not settled.
Not at all.
We're talking about very real, ongoing debates, proposed changes that could fundamentally alter how Bitcoin operates, like right at its core, and the potential impact. Well, it touches anyone who's even remotely interested in or maybe already involved with this digital asset. Our promise, as always, is to give you that critical context, the granular details you need to understand this incredibly complex situation without us taking any sides. We're just here to be your guides through what Crowder presents as a pretty challenging and definitely divisive landscape.
Exactly. Impartial guides.
So, as we get ready to navigate this internal struggle, let's maybe keep a question in mind for ourselves. What does it really mean for a system like Bitcoin, supposedly decentralized, to face such fundamental internal disagreement, like disagreement over its very identity? And when the dust finally settles, what truly defines Bitcoin's purpose? And maybe crucially, who actually gets to decide that definition?
Okay, let's cut right to the chase then. Because at the heart of Crowder's argument, there's this warning. And it's so stark, honestly, it demands immediate attention. He asserts that there's a faction within the Bitcoin core development team actively pushing what he calls a controversial node software update.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the alleged consequences of this update that really grab you, because they seem to go way beyond just technical stuff. Crowder claims it would basically force ordinary users, people running their own Bitcoin nodes.
Everyday Bitcoiner, yeah. Exactly. Force them to relay massive amounts of non-monetary data. And here's where it pivots from just concerning to, well, genuinely disturbing. Crowder's most severe accusation is that this data could potentially include illegal material. Specifically, he mentions child sexual abuse material, CSAM.
Wow. Yeah, that's heavy.
Right. And he warns this outcome could, well, not only catastrophically tarnish Bitcoin's reputation, which they've worked hard to build, but also expose everyday Bitcoiners, those very individuals helping secure the network, to some really severe legal and reputational risks. It's a claim that just elevates the whole debate onto a completely different level.
It absolutely does. That accusation immediately zooms in on what is really a foundational philosophical battle inside Bitcoin. Crowder's main concern isn't just some technical detail in the code. It's a fundamental challenge to Bitcoin's very identity. He argues pretty forcefully that Bitcoin was created to be sound money, right? A robust, censorship-resistant, peer-to-peer digital currency, primarily a pristine ledger for transferring value.
It's the original vision.
Exactly. The question he's implicitly posing, the one at the core of this whole conflict, is, can Bitcoin also be a general-purpose data layer? Capable of storing all sorts of arbitrary information, almost like the internet itself, without totally compromising that original monetary purpose? And Crowder. He unequivocally believes it cannot. He positions any deviation, anything away from that sound money principle, as basically a corruption of Satoshi's original vision. He fears it morphs Bitcoin into something. Well, unrecognizable, losing its unique value proposition.
So it's like trying to be two things at once and failing at both.
That's precisely his fear. Think about the implications of forcing individual node operators
Yeah.
potentially to relay data you might not endorse, maybe data you find morally reprehensible or even, as he suggests, outright illegal. That's profound for a decentralized network. In a centralized system, liability for content usually falls on the platform, right? Like Facebook or Google.
Sure, there's someone in charge.
But in Bitcoin, if every independent node is, by default, transmitting data that could be illegal, what happens to individual responsibility? Where does the buck stop? This isn't just hypothetical. Back in the early internet days, ISPs faced similar legal puzzles about content flowing through their networks. It led to complex laws, things like safe harbor provisions.
Right, to protect the carrier.
Exactly. But Bitcoin, by its very design, it lacks that central entity. There's no one to mediate these issues. So this effectively shifts this potentially huge, maybe unknown, legal burden onto individuals just participating in the network. It fundamentally challenges that whole idea of, anonymous, distributed responsibility. It asks you, the node operator, to really consider, am I accidentally becoming a conduit for stuff I totally oppose? And what could that mean for me legally? Crowder argues this is a direct attack on the sovereignty of individual node runners.
Okay, so it's not just about philosophy, it's about real-world risk for the users.
Precisely. And for Crowder, this isn't some accidental side effect. He sees it as a deliberate weakening of Bitcoin's core purpose. He argues that by expanding its utility beyond just sound money, by making it store arbitrary data, you dilute its integrity, you muddy its fundamental value proposition. Think of it like a specialized high-performance racing car, pure speed, precision. Then suddenly, someone decides to fit it with a massive cargo bay for hauling, I don't know, furniture.
Right, it can do something new, but it's not really a racing car anymore.
Exactly. It gains maybe some new utility, but it sacrifices its core design, its core purpose. Crowder argues Bitcoin's purity as a monetary system gets compromised when it becomes just a receptacle for all kinds of data, especially if that data is seen as spam or worse, as illicit content. He suggests this isn't just a technical upgrade, it's a redefinition of Bitcoin itself, driven by forces he sees as, well, harmful to its original mission. And the economic side is key too. Block space is scarce, right?
Inherently, yeah.
So if that scarce space gets filled up with, say, JPEGs or other non-monetary inscriptions, it could drive up transaction fees for actual monetary transfers. That makes Bitcoin less accessible as sound money for regular people, potentially centralizing control around those who can afford the higher fees.
Which kind of defeats the purpose.
Right, and we absolutely cannot underscore enough the gravity of that CSAM accusation. This isn't just some technical quibble about transaction speed or block size limits. This immediately takes the debate into a realm of profound ethical, moral, and legal urgency. The mere potential, as Crowder frames it, for child sexual abuse material to be relayed by Bitcoin nodes that instantly galvanizes opposition. It raises the stakes to an almost unimaginable degree.
It changes everything.
It moves the discussion way beyond code and into this deeply sensitive, universally condemned territory of human rights, child protection. This accusation really serves to highlight, for Crowder, the extreme dangers of turning Bitcoin into a general data layer. He's arguing the risks aren't just reputational. They can have devastating real-world consequences for individuals running nodes and for Bitcoin's whole public image. It's a powerful rhetorical tool, no doubt. It forces everyone involved to consider the absolute worst-case scenario. And if that scenario is even remotely possible, he argues, it demands an immediate, serious reevaluation of these proposed changes. #tag dissecting the controversial Bitcoin core update.
Okay, you've definitely underscored the incredibly high stakes here. Now, let's try and unpack the more technical claims Crowder is making about this specific software update. We've got the big picture warning, but, the devil's in the details, right?
Absolutely.
Can you walk us through what this update actually proposes to do? And why does Crowder see it as such a fundamental betrayal of Bitcoin's original design?
Okay, yeah. So according to Crowder, this controversial Bitcoin core update represents a subtle but really profound shift in how things work. It would make relaying non-financial data, and that's a category he uses to include things like inscriptions, NFTs, and what he broadly just calls spam. It would make relaying that the default behavior for nodes.
Default. Not just possible, but the default.
Exactly. That distinction, the move from maybe an opt-in possibility to a default setting, that's absolutely central to his critique. So instead of node operators needing to consciously choose to enable processing this kind of data,
Yeah.
they would, by default, be expected to do it. And they'd have to actively go in and configure their nodes to opt out if they want to filter it. It basically flips the script. It puts the burden of filtering onto the individual user, not onto the network's inherent design.
Right, so it changes the assumption.
Precisely. And maybe let's quickly clarify those terms, grounding them in Crowder's critical view for our listeners who are already pretty familiar with this stuff. For those who know the ordinals protocol, Crowder sees the introduction of inscriptions, these unique data blobs embedded on individual satoshis, using existing tech like Taproot. He sees that as a fundamental break from Bitcoin's monetary purpose.
Because it's not money moving.
Right. Unlike typical transactions, inscriptions allow basically arbitrary data. That effectively turns Bitcoin into this general-purpose data layer, which he strongly opposes. NFTs, non-fungible tokens in this context, are often just a specific kind of inscription, where unique digital items or identifiers are recorded on the blockchain, creating collectibles.
Like a digital art or
Yeah.
collectibles, yeah.
Exactly. And spam, as Crowder defines it, isn't just like junk email. For him, it's any data he deems non-monetary or extraneous. Data that, by using up valuable, scarce block space, in his view, just congests the chain and detracts from its main job. So this update, as Crowder sees it, would essentially normalize and simplify the spread of all this stuff by making it the default.
And why is that defaulting so significant in his view? It sounds like a small technical change.
Well, in Crowder's narrative, the significance of defaulting can't really be overstated. It signals a deep shift in the network's, let's say, operational philosophy. It's not just that this data can exist on the chain anymore. It's that the network's default setup now expects it, facilitates its propagation. For Crowder, this fundamentally alters the nature of what a Bitcoin node even does, what it processes, what it validates. It changes the sort of unspoken agreement about what counts as valid or intended data on the blockchain. This change, in his view, signals an implicit acceptance, maybe even encouragement, of storing arbitrary data, which, again, he believes just erodes Bitcoin's identity as a purely monetary system. It's like a reprioritization of block space happening without, he'd argue, clear community consensus.
Okay, so how does that connect to the wider network? You mentioned the relay network before.
Right, so Bitcoin functions as this relay network. Nodes validate transactions and then pass them along, transmitting them across the global network. Modifying the default behavior affects the whole system. Crowder argues that by enabling non-financial data as the default, you're essentially opening a door. And this makes it easier, maybe inadvertently, for illicit content to circulate across the network. If filtering this data out requires conscious effort, maybe technical know-how, possibly even software tweaks, a lot of node operators might just not bother. They effectively become passive conduits for whatever gets inscribed on the chain.
Just letting it flow through.
Exactly. This lowers the barrier for problematic content to spread, regardless of the intentions of the person running the node. It creates a potential vector for those very legal and ethical nightmares he warns about, thereby increasing the systemic risk for everyone participating.
Which brings us back to his claim of a deliberate weakening.
Yes. For him, sound money means a system laser-focused on verifiable, censorship-resistant monetary transactions, characterized by scarcity, predictable issuance. Introducing arbitrary data storage, especially making it the default, well, it introduces noise, complexity, non-monetary concerns into what he believes should be this pristine, uncluttered ledger of value. He argues these two functions, pure money and general data storage, are just inherently incompatible. One will inevitably dilute or compromise the other. And this isn't just philosophical for Crowder. He argues allowing arbitrary data fundamentally changes Bitcoin's economics. If block space gets eaten up by JPEGs and text files, it could push up transaction fees for actual money transfers, making Bitcoin less useful as sound money for ordinary people, potentially centralizing control around those who can afford the high fees.
Okay, so let's bring it back to the individual node operator again. You touched on the legal risks.
Right. Imagine you running your node at home. If it defaults to relaying potentially illegal material, what are the technical burdens? Sure, maybe increased storage, more bandwidth usage, but more critically, what are the legal liabilities placed upon you?
Could you actually get in trouble?
That's the question Crowder forces you to ask. Imagine being held legally liable for content you just passively relayed, because your software was set up that way by default. Could you face prosecution, for example, for unknowingly transmitting illicit content across international borders? This isn't some abstract legal theory game. It transforms what seems like a minor technical decision into a very real, very tangible personal risk for anyone running a node. it directly impacts your personal stake in this debate. It urges you to really scrutinize how the network operates and what responsibilities you might be inadvertently taking on just by participating. This decision, he argues, shifts Bitcoin from being a neutral tool to potentially being a personal liability.
It's really clear that these technical decisions have immense weight. But Crowder also paints this vivid and honestly quite disturbing picture of the human side of things. This isn't just about code anymore, is it? He talks about a toxic debate culture that seems to have spiraled into really deeply personal attacks. What specific examples does he give that illustrate just how corrosive this environment has become, beyond just, disagreeing on the tech?
You're absolutely right. The human dimension, the way Crowder describes it, sounds like it's devolved far beyond just a respectful technical disagreement. He details this landscape of really intense personal animosity, aggressive tactics that seem to have completely overshadowed any chance of productive discussion. He alleges, for instance, that certain developers and prominent influencers, the ones advocating for the changes he opposes, have actually been seen, maybe online, mocking denial of service attacks. DOS attacks directed at what he calls ordinary Bitcoiners.
Mocking attacks.
Yeah. For our listeners, a DOS attack is meant to shut down a machine or network resource, basically stop someone from participating. The idea that someone would mock these disruptive, potentially damaging actions instead of condemning them or trying to figure out who's doing it, well, it says a lot about the perceived environment. It suggests a lack of empathy, maybe even outright hostility towards voices that disagree. It's a pretty stark indicator of how far the debate has maybe fallen from just reasoned technical discussion.
And it gets worse than that.
Apparently so. He claims this harassment has extended far beyond the people directly involved in the debate. He says it's reached into their personal lives, specifically targeting the wives of individuals involved.
Targeting families.
Yeah. This deliberate move to involve family members, to kind of weaponize personal relationships, that's often a pretty clear sign that a debate has crossed the line, moved beyond intellectual disagreement into this realm of really personal, often vicious animosity. It's a tactic, really, designed to inflict maximum emotional, social damage, trying to silence dissent through intimidation, not through argument. Historically, you see tactics like that employed when the intellectual arguments start to weaken and the goal shifts from trying to persuade someone to just shutting them down.
And he shares a personal experience too, right?
He does. Crowder shares his own, frankly, harrowing personal experience. He claims he was falsely accused of being a pedophile. He recounts this as a life-ruining attack aimed at silencing him.
That is incredibly serious.
Immense. The gravity of an accusation like that, especially if it's false, is just immense. It's like the nuclear option in online harassment. It's designed not just to discredit someone's arguments, but to utterly destroy their reputation, their social standing, often their professional life. It aims to basically ostracize an individual completely from public discourse by tapping into this universal moral revulsion. It effectively short-circuits any possibility of a reasoned debate. Crowder clearly views this as an attempt to completely deplatform him, not just from the Bitcoin debate, but from his community entirely.
So how does he interpret these extreme tactics? What does he think it says about the other side?
His interpretation is quite pointed. He views these extreme tactics as compelling evidence, basically proof, that those pushing these controversial changes cannot defend them technically or morally. Yeah, from Crowder's perspective, if the arguments for changing Bitcoin Core were truly solid, grounded in good technical reasoning and ethical considerations, there would be absolutely no need to resort to such, well, abhorrent personal attacks. He suggests that using these severe, often baseless personal accusations actually exposes a fundamental weakness in their position. It reveals a reliance on intimidation rather than intellectual merit. And this, he argues, leads to a breakdown of that meritocratic ideal that Bitcoin often strives for.
And that kind of environment must just shut down real discussion, right?
Absolutely. It raises a critical question about the health of these decentralized communities. Such a toxic debate environment inevitably poisons productive discussion. It alienates participants, regardless of the technical merits on either side. When people fear personal attacks or doxing or false accusations like the one Crowder describes, they become less likely to engage, less likely to voice maybe crucial dissenting opinions. And this ultimately starves the community of diverse perspectives, of rigorous debate. It creates this chilling effect where maybe conformity is incentivized over critical thinking. And that undermines the very open source ethos that many decentralized projects claim to uphold. This loss of diverse voices, Crowder argues, allows these controversial changes to proceed with maybe less public scrutiny, less rigorous challenge than they deserve.
So what does this mean for decentralized communities more broadly if things get this bad?
Well, the implications are significant. How do these communities self-regulate against such behaviors? Without a central authority, no HR department, no police force to enforce codes of conduct, mediate disputes, or sanction people for harassment. What mechanisms are left? Especially when the community itself seems to fail to uphold even a basic standard of respectful engagement. Crowder's account suggests a fundamental breakdown in community governance, where the supposed meritocracy of open source development has maybe given way to something far more chaotic and damaging. Driven perhaps by mob mentality and personal vendettas, this situation poses a really profound challenge to the whole idea of decentralized, voluntary collaboration. It raises serious questions about whether such systems can truly govern themselves effectively, especially when they're under duress or facing intense internal conflict.
That portrayal of a deeply personal, often vicious community dynamic is, well, it's sobering. But beyond just the tactics, Crowder also draws this really clear line connecting all this to financial incentives. He claims that specific companies and individuals benefit financially from allowing this arbitrary data, like ordinals and inscriptions, onto Bitcoin. So, who are these entities, and how exactly does Crowder allege they're profiting from what he labels spam? It sounds like a strong accusation, suggesting self-interest is driving this technical shift.
You're absolutely right. Crowder doesn't just point to sort of abstract motivations here. He meticulously tries to follow the money. He constructs this detailed narrative suggesting that financial incentives are a powerful, maybe even the primary, driver behind these controversial changes.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's naming specific entities, specific individuals. He's laying out their alleged mechanisms for profiting from what he considers spam-related activity. This is a really fundamental thread in his whole Civil War narrative. It suggests a deliberate economic push behind the technical shifts he's describing.
Okay, so who does he name first?
First, he highlights MRA, which is Marathon Digital Holdings. They're a significant publicly traded Bitcoin mining company. Crowder asserts that MRA profits from spam-related activity. What he means is, they mine blocks that contain a high volume of inscriptions and other non-monetary data, and they generate transaction fees from these activities.
Yeah.
But critically, he also alleges that MRA funds developers through Brink.
Okay, and Brink is?
Brink is a prominent nonprofit organization. Its whole purpose is to support Bitcoin core development, mainly through grants to developers. So it's a really key channel for developer funding. This accusation creates this direct, tangible link in Crowder's narrative. If a company profits from certain types of transactions, and at the same time funds the developers working on the software that facilitates those very transactions, well, it immediately raises concerns, doesn't it? Potential conflicts of interest, undue influence.
Right, are development priorities being subtly steered?
Exactly. Are they being steered by financial beneficiaries rather than purely by the protocol's original vision or, community consensus? Crowder argues this represents a form of, commercial capture, where corporate interests are subtly dictating the direction of what's supposed to be a decentralized open source project.
Okay, who else does he point to?
Next, he points to projects like Taproot Wizards and their backers, and he explicitly names Jameson Lopp as, in his words, a spam profiteer. Taproot Wizards are a pretty well-known example of an NFT-like project built on Bitcoin, using ordinals and inscriptions. These projects, they monetize by creating, marketing, selling these unique digital artifacts inscribed onto the Bitcoin blockchain.
So they directly benefit from inscriptions existing?
Directly. Crowder views this entire emerging ecosystem, the marketplaces, the artists, the collectors, as benefiting directly and financially from the very spam, he argues, is corrupting Bitcoin. He sees it as a whole new industry built entirely on basically repurposing Bitcoin's block space for non-monetary uses, essentially siphoning value, in his view, from its core monetary purpose. His use of the word profiteer is obviously not neutral. It implies something exploitative.
And it doesn't stop there.
No, the scope broadens further. He includes David Bailey, who's associated with Bitcoin Magazine. Crowder alleges that Bailey is profiting through investments in Taproot Wizards and rare Satoshi schemes. This extends the narrative of financial entanglement beyond just mining operations and NFT projects. Now it includes influential media figures and their investment strategies within the Bitcoin ecosystem.
So even the information sources might be compromised.
That's Crowder's implication. That even those who shape public opinion, who control influential platforms, who disseminate information about Bitcoin, even they aren't immune to these alleged financial motivations. He suggests a potential for bias in their reporting or commentary because they have vested interests in the very phenomena they're covering, which could, of course, undermine the journalistic integrity of these outlets in shaping the public conversation around Bitcoin.
So, putting it all together, what's his overarching argument about this financial aspect?
His overarching argument is that all this activity, the funding streams, the creation of inscription-based projects, the investments, the media support, it creates what he calls a corrupt ecosystem. In his words, developers, companies, and influencers collude to normalize spam. The implication isn't just passive adaptation to new tech. It's an active, maybe coordinated effort to promote and integrate functionalities that serve their financial interests, even if this, in Crowder's view, fundamentally compromises Bitcoin's original mission as a pure monetary network. He sees it as a systemic issue where various powerful actors are sort of aligned to alter Bitcoin for their own gain.
This really raises questions about the purity of Bitcoin's development, doesn't it, given its ethos?
It absolutely does. If Bitcoin's ethos is built on decentralization, open source collaboration, the principle of sound money, then introducing these strong financial interests directly tied to specific protocol changes could, as Crowder suggests, profoundly pollute that process.
Yeah.
It forces us, and maybe you, the listener, to ask, how does money, especially large amounts of it, potentially influence technical decisions in a project that prides itself on being meritocratic and community-driven? This tension between open-source ideals and commercial realities isn't unique to Bitcoin, of course, but it's felt very acutely in a system where integrity and trust are absolutely paramount and where the economic incentives are just so incredibly potent.
And the specific point about developers being funded by entities that profit from the changes.
Yeah, the implications there are pretty clear. It creates an environment where their technical judgments, however well-intentioned they might be, could at least be perceived as being swayed by financial gain, rather than purely by what's best for the protocol's long-term health or its original vision. This isn't necessarily an accusation of, like, outright fraud in every case, but it's more of a structural critique about conflicts of interest and how they can seriously erode trust and perceived impartiality within a vital development community. It suggests that commercial pressures, even when they're subtle, can influence the trajectory of a decentralized technology, potentially leading it down a path that diverges significantly from its initial principles.
That's a powerful and pretty intricate narrative of alleged financial entanglement driving these shifts. But Crowder isn't just describing current problems. He actually pinpoints a specific historical moment. He claims that the rot began in the year 2023. He sees that as a fundamental turning point for Bitcoin. What exactly happened in 2023 that, in his view, set Bitcoin on this path he considers so destructive? It almost sounds like he's describing a kind of fall from grace.
Yeah, Crowder's narrative is definitely very precise in its historical framing. He singles out 2023 as this watershed year, the moment the rot began, signaling what he views as a fundamental and really detrimental deviation from Bitcoin's original path. He uses this specific timeline to construct a story of decline, contrasting a perceived sort of golden age with the current state of affairs. For him, this wasn't just organic evolution. It was a deliberate misdirection that started with specific events.
And the main event was?
The singular event he really highlights is the introduction of Casey Rodarmer's inscriptions. Just for context again, Rodarmer created the Ordinals protocol. It leveraged Bitcoin's existing Taproot upgrade, and it enabled the inscription of arbitrary data, could be text, images, even small programs, directly onto individual Satoshis. Now, from one perspective, you could see this as a novel technical innovation, right? Creating new use cases for Bitcoin, demonstrating its flexibility.
Sure, some people were excited about it.
Absolutely. But from Crowder's perspective, this innovation directly enabled what he uncompromisingly labels spam. He views these inscriptions as non-monetary extraneous data. Data that, by consuming valuable block space and network resources, fundamentally clogs the chain and detracts from Bitcoin's primary purpose as sound money. He basically argues that while the technology itself might have been clever, its application was a profound misdirection, fundamentally altering the economic model of Bitcoin's block space.
And he connects this to changes in Bitcoin Core itself.
Yes. Simultaneously with the rise of inscriptions, Crowder claims that Bitcoin Core changes began drifting toward spam friendliness. He doesn't present this as mere coincidence. He strongly implies it was either coordinated or, at the very least, a highly convenient alignment in the development path of the main Bitcoin software client. He suggests that not only was the ability to inscribe data introduced, but the core software itself started adapting in ways that were more accommodating to this new type of data. For example, by not filtering it out by default. This, in his view, signaled an implicit endorsement or acceptance of inscriptions by the core development team, further cementing what he perceives as a departure from Bitcoin's original design principles. He describes it almost like a shift in the social contract, where what was once implicitly disallowed or discouraged became implicitly allowed, even facilitated by default.
And how were these concerns initially received, according to Crowder?
Well, another crucial element in his historical account is the initial reaction from prominent figures within the Bitcoin community. Crowder describes quite vividly how individuals like David Bailey, who we mentioned before, and others allegedly dismissed concerns as conspiracy theories.
Ah, the classic dismissal.
Right, it's a common tactic, especially in fast-moving tech spaces. That's exactly the narrative turn he takes. Crowder then makes this powerful counterargument, almost an I told you so. He claims that those very conspiracies are now reality. He interprets the widespread proliferation of inscriptions and the alleged shift in Bitcoin Core's stance as a validation of those early warnings. For him, what was once dismissed as maybe alarmist speculation has now demonstrably materialized into tangible changes within the network changes he sees as harmful. And this, in his view, proves the early critics were right all along. This narrative technique is quite effective. It empowers his audience, suggesting that those who saw the danger early were perceptive, while those who dismissed it were either blind or maybe even complicit. It paints this picture of a foresighted few being initially ridiculed, only for their dire predictions to allegedly bear fruit.
It really highlights how important framing history is in these debates.
Immensely. Identifying a specific turning point, a beginning of the rot, allows Crowder to construct this coherent story of decline and corruption. It makes it easier for his audience to understand the stakes involved and maybe to identify with the idea of a necessary struggle, a fight to return to a perceived golden age or the original vision of Bitcoin. It frames the current conflict not as just natural evolution, but as a deliberate deviation from an intended path, almost like a betrayal of the founding ideals.
And it speaks to how narratives evolve, especially with tech.
Absolutely. How are dissenting views often categorized in these fast-moving tech communities? Often, they're framed as resistance to progress, maybe Luddism, or as Crowder apparently experienced, as conspiracy theories lacking any real-world basis. But what happens when those theories, at least in the eyes of their proponents, allegedly materialize into widespread phenomena? It significantly empowers the dissenters, doesn't it? It validates their early warnings. And crucially, it can profoundly undermine the credibility of those who initially dismissed the concerns. This fuels further distrust, it intensifies divisions within the community, and it makes building consensus exponentially more difficult going forward, because each side feels either vindicated by history or betrayed by it.
Okay, so Crowder presents this compelling, if pretty bleak, narrative of a deliberate shift, alleged corruption, a specific historical turning point. But he's not just lamenting, right? He also highlights what he sees as a genuine groundswell of resistance coming from ordinary Bitcoiners. It's one thing to criticize, but what's the actual pushback he sees? Is it just scattered complaints, or is there evidence of a real, maybe organized resistance from the people he calls ordinary Bitcoiners? What specific actions or trends does he point to as evidence?
Yeah, Crowder definitely transitions from just diagnosing the problem to demonstrating what he sees as a collective and tangible response from these ordinary Bitcoiners. He presents this not just as isolated grumbling, but as a genuine market response that reflects a growing sentiment against these controversial changes. He's essentially showing that the community isn't passive, that people are actively choosing alternatives as a way to try and reclaim Bitcoin's original mission, as he defines it.
So what's the first piece of evidence he points to?
One key piece of evidence he cites is the rise in Bitcoin Knots nodes. Now, for our listeners, Bitcoin Knots is an alternative software client. It's essentially a fork of a Bitcoin core, meaning it shares most of the code, but it's developed and maintained with a distinct philosophy. It's often described as being more resistant to spam, meaning it typically includes features or default configurations designed to filter out or deprioritize non-monetary data, like inscriptions, from the blocks it processes and relays.
So people are actively choosing this alternative software.
That's Crowder's point. He presents the increasing adoption of Bitcoin Knots as a tangible, on-the-ground action by users. They're actively choosing a software client that aligns with their vision of Bitcoin as primarily sound money, not a general-purpose data layer. This isn't just talk, right? It's a direct, practical way users can express dissent and support a different interpretation of the protocol. It's like a vote with their computational power, a practical demonstration of their preference for a particular network behavior.
Okay, what else? He mentioned miners too, right?
Yes. Another significant indicator for Crowder is the increase in Ocean's hash rate. Ocean is a Bitcoin mining pool. And an increase in its hash rate, the amount of mining power directed towards it, is presented by Crowder as signaling miners prefer a cleaner protocol.
How does that signaling work?
Well, miners, through the sheer computational power, hash rate, they choose to dedicate to a specific mining pool, can implicitly signal their preferences for certain protocol rules or interpretations. If Ocean, as Crowder suggests, explicitly offers a cleaner protocol, maybe one that's configured to filter out inscriptions from the blocks it mines, or perhaps prioritizes purely monetary transactions, then its growing hash rate would indicate that a segment of the mining community is actively aligning with Crowder's vision of a cleaner Bitcoin. This is a powerful form of economic and network signaling. It demonstrates that potentially a significant portion of the network security providers share his concerns about spam and are willing to dedicate their valuable resources to support an alternative vision.
And he makes a claim about overall community sentiment.
He does. To really drive home the point, Crowder makes this bold, maybe even hyperbolic claim. He asserts that 99.99% of Bitcoiners want Bitcoin as money, not as a storage layer for JPEGs and spam.
99.99%, that seems high.
Oh, it's almost certainly rhetorical hyperbole. It's very difficult to prove definitively, but it powerfully communicates his deeply held belief, or at least the belief he wants to project, that the vast majority of the community shares his concerns, that they desire Bitcoin to stick to its original purpose, and that they unequivocally reject the inscription and NFT phenomena as fundamental misuses of the blockchain. It paints this picture of a silent majority whose will is supposedly being subverted by a vocal, maybe financially motivated minority.
So these actions, like switching nodes or choosing mining pools, they actually have power in a decentralized system.
Absolutely. This collective action really highlights the unique power of grassroots movements and alternative software in decentralized networks. Unlike centralized systems where, one company dictates changes, in Bitcoin, users and miners can exert real influence through their choices. Choices of software, node configurations, mining pools. This is a fundamental aspect of Bitcoin's decentralization and its resilience. When parts of the community disagree with core development decisions, they can effectively vote with their feet, or maybe more accurately, vote with their computing power and their economic activity. It's a powerful check on the influence of any single development group or corporate entity. It demonstrates that ultimately, the users and miners do hold significant sway over the network's direction.
And that signaling through hash rate, how influential is that really?
It's a significant factor. While it's not a direct democratic vote, a sustained and noticeable shift in hash rate towards pools supporting certain views can put immense pressure on core developers. They have to consider those preferences. After all, the security and smooth functioning of the network depend entirely on broad miner participation. If a substantial chunk of miners starts refusing to process certain types of transactions or strongly prioritizes others, it could make those less favored transactions less reliable, maybe more costly, or even effectively censor them to some degree. That indirectly influences network behavior and, potentially, future development choices. It's an economic incentive mechanism that reflects ideological alignment.
But what about the risk of splitting the community if everyone starts using different software?
That's the flip side, and it's a crucial consideration. We have to think about the broader implications if a significant portion of the community does diverge onto alternative software like knots, or aligns with specific mining pools with different filtering rules. On one hand, yes, it's a healthy expression of decentralization. It shows the network's resilience, its ability to adapt to diverse visions without needing central control. That's powerful. On the other hand, could it be a sign of dangerous fragmentation? Could it lead to a divided network, maybe increased complexity, or even in the worst case, a contentious hard fork if the ideological gap just becomes too wide to bridge? Crowder clearly positions this pushback as a necessary defense, a vital act of self-preservation for Bitcoin's soul. But such divisions, while demonstrating decentralization, can also introduce serious complexities for network unity, for interoperability, and for the overall stability of Bitcoin's crucial social layer. It could make achieving future consensus much, much harder. It's a really delicate balance between freedom of choice and maintaining cohesive development.
That's a really complex picture of how the community is responding, suggesting this significant grassroots resistance. But Crowder takes his critique even further, doesn't he? He levels direct allegations of corruption among developers themselves. That's a seriously heavy charge within an open source project where, trust and meritocracy are often held up as paramount ideals. Who is he singling out here? And what's the specific nature of the criticisms against them?
Indeed, yeah, Crowder's argument definitely doesn't shy away from direct confrontation. He directly challenges the integrity of specific developers within the Bitcoin Core project, alleging corruption among developers. And you're right, that is a profoundly serious accusation. The perceived trustworthiness, the neutrality of core developers is absolutely paramount in an open source, decentralized system like Bitcoin. The whole thing relies on community consensus and transparent development processes to maintain its legitimacy.
So who is the example he uses?
He singles out a Bitcoin core developer known as Antoine as a key example. Crowder presents Antoine as someone who is, in his words, changing Bitcoin to suit startups rather than its original mission. For Crowder, this distinction is critical. It cuts right to the core of Bitcoin's purpose. He believes Bitcoin should stay laser-focused on its fundamental goal: sound money, a neutral, permissionless monetary layer, period. However, in his view, Antoine's actions and contributions seem to reflect a pivot towards enabling commercial interests, new business models, particularly those that seem to capitalize on inscription-based activities.
So connecting development directly to commercial pressure.
Exactly. This directly links a specific developer's actions to external commercial pressures. It suggests, in Crowder's narrative, a potential betrayal of Bitcoin's foundational principles in favor of entrepreneurial ventures. He argues that prioritizing startup utility over monetary purity is a fundamental misdirection of development effort, driven by external, non-monetary incentives.
Is this criticism just coming from Crowder?
No, and he makes a point of highlighting that. He notes that this kind of development direction has drawn significant criticism from within the broader Bitcoin developer community itself. He mentions that Rockstar Dev and others, referring to, respected, longtime contributors and commentators in the Bitcoin space, allegedly criticize this behavior as blindness caused by status and power. This points to internal dissent. It suggests that concerns about developer motivations aren't just exclusive to Crowder, but are perhaps echoed by other influential figures. The idea that status and power could cloud judgment within a supposedly meritocratic open source project, that's a powerful critique.
Meritocracy being the ideal, yeah.
Right. It implies that personal influence, maybe social hierarchies within the dev community, or even just the desire for recognition, are impacting technical decisions, rather than purely objective assessment or dedication to Bitcoin's original vision. This highlights a real tension between the idealized meritocracy of open source and the sometimes messy realities of human social dynamics.
And his overall description of Bitcoin core development.
His broader and much more damning argument here is that Bitcoin Core has fundamentally shifted. It's gone from what he terms a meritocracy to, in his provocative words, a clown show.
Wow, clown show.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast. A meritocracy in this context implies decisions are made based solely on the quality of ideas and code. The best technical arguments win, regardless of who presents them. By declaring it a clown show, Crowder suggests a complete breakdown in that idealized process. He implies that bad judgment and contempt for users dominate, indicating a departure from rigorous, principled development and a disregard for the community's concerns. It paints this picture of a development process that's become arbitrary, maybe disorganized, and increasingly detached from the needs and values of its core user base, potentially sacrificing long-term integrity for short-term gains or bowing to external pressures.
What are the implications if people start believing that, if trust erodes?
Well, that's a crucial discussion point. What are the implications for the long-term health and the perceived legitimacy of a project if its core development, often seen as its brain, is viewed as operating in such a manner? If the project's governance, even an informal consensus-driven one like Bitcoin's, is perceived as prioritizing status or commercial interests or just personal judgment over technical excellence and user needs, it can profoundly damage long-term trust and credibility. It creates an environment where fundamental disagreements aren't resolved through reasoned debate, but maybe through power struggles or accusations of malfeasance. This erodes the very social contract that binds the community together, making future collaboration exponentially more difficult.
And this idea of status and power in a decentralized community, how does that work?
It's subtle, but real. We can analyze the powerful, albeit often subtle, role of status and power within a decentralized development community. While there's no formal hierarchy, no CEO, influence, reputation, control over specific code repositories or communication channels like Slack or mailing lists, these can still be incredibly powerful forces. How can these factors, whether consciously or unconsciously, influence technical decisions and community dynamics? Crowder argues they can lead to decisions that serve a select few, maybe specific commercial entities, rather than the broad user base. potentially corrupting the very essence of decentralized, community-driven development that Bitcoin was supposed to embody. It suggests that even in a decentralized system, concentrations of influence can pose a threat, much like in centralized systems, just maybe in a different disguise.
It sounds like a fundamental tension for successful open source projects.
It often is. This situation also highlights a common, almost inevitable tension for many highly successful open source projects. That ongoing balance between serving the original mission of a technology and adapting to new use cases or commercial pressures. While innovation is often driven by new applications and commercial adoption, Crowder's perspective vehemently argues that this adaptation, in this specific instance, is not a healthy evolution. It's a fundamental departure from foundational values. He fears it will lead to a loss of Bitcoin's core identity, transforming it from this pristine monetary protocol into something far more generic and, in his view, compromised. It's a challenging tightrope walk for any project with a strong ideological underpinning, and Crowder clearly believes Bitcoin is falling off that road.
Okay, so given all these really serious concerns and escalating allegations, we're talking compromised development, a toxic debate culture, financial motivations, potential legal risks. It's hardly surprising that Crowder has a very clear, very urgent call to action for his audience. If people resonate with his assessment of this internal conflict, what does he specifically urge concerned Bitcoiners to do? It sounds like he believes the very future of Bitcoin rests on these individual choices.
You're exactly right. Crowder's article isn't just an analysis. It absolutely functions as a powerful rallying cry. It's designed to mobilize his audience. He presents a very direct, very unequivocal call to action, urging his audience to take concrete steps to actively resist what he views as the ongoing corruption and hijacking of Bitcoin's original mission. His recommendations are all about empowering individual users to push back against the changes he so vehemently highlighted. He frames their choices as vital acts of network defense.
And what's the first most direct action he recommends?
His first and probably most forceful recommendation is simply stop running Bitcoin Core.
Just start using the main software.
Exactly. This is a direct, even radical challenge to the status quo. Bitcoin Core is undeniably the dominant, most widely used software client for the Bitcoin network. To suggest just abandoning it is to propose a significant, almost revolutionary shift in user behavior. It's basically an act of digital protest, a clear signal of dissent, a strong vote of no confidence in the current development direction and maybe the leadership of the core team, as he sees it. He views it as severing ties with the perceived source of the rot, a move towards digital self-exile from the mainstream development path, and maybe a way to exert direct economic pressure by reducing the perceived user base for this controversial software.
Okay, so if not core, then what?
He provides a concrete, immediate alternative. He strongly urges users to switch to Bitcoin knots. He explicitly frames this recommendation as the way to fight spam and preserve Bitcoin's original purpose. As we discussed, Bitcoin knots is that distinct software client, a fork of Core, specifically maintained with a different philosophical approach. It's generally configured to be more resistant to the types of non-monetary data, the spam that Crowder criticizes. This recommendation gives people a tangible, actionable step, a way to align their operational choices, their very participation in the network, with Crowder's ideological stance. By choosing knots, users are actively opting for a specific vision of Bitcoin's future, one that prioritizes monetary purity over general data storage, and one that maybe isn't susceptible to the same perceived influences as Bitcoin Core.
And he brings up running your own node again.
Yes, his call also powerfully reiterates that fundamental Bitcoin ethos, self-reliance. He encourages users to run your own node to remain sovereign and resist corporate developer capture. This is a core tenet of Bitcoin right from the beginning, the idea that individual users should validate transactions themselves rather than just delegating trust to intermediaries or centralized services.
Verified, don't trust.
Exactly. Crowder connects this directly to the current conflict. He argues that running your own node, especially a client like Knots that might be configured to filter unwanted data, is a crucial step in maintaining personal autonomy. It's a defense against what he perceives as the undue influence of corporations and certain developers who, in his view, are steering Bitcoin away from its decentralized sovereign roots. He implies that if you rely on someone else's node, you're subject to their rules and filters, thereby compromising your own sovereignty.
And beyond individual action.
Finally, he advises his audience to support movements and resources that aim to defend Bitcoin from inscription-driven spam. This is a broader call for active collective participation of the resistance. This could mean donating to developers working on alternative clients like Knots. It could mean engaging in public discussions, trying to raise awareness, promoting the alternative vision of Bitcoin he supports. It's really about building a collective front, strengthening the community's ability to influence the protocol's direction through organized advocacy, maybe financial support for those who align with his views. He sees it as a necessary political and economic struggle to reclaim Bitcoin's identity, encouraging a concerted effort from everyone concerned.
It really underscores the urgency he feels.
Absolutely. This call to action is particularly significant in understanding Crowder's perceived urgency. It reflects his belief that passive observation just isn't enough anymore. The stakes, in his view, are so incredibly high that active intervention by the user base is absolutely necessary to safeguard Bitcoin's future. It's a call to arms, framed within the technical choices available to a decentralized network participant. It transforms what might seem like a simple technical preference into a powerful ideological statement.
But again, what about the consequences of fragmentation? If lots of people actually do this,
That's the crucial question we keep circling back to. What could be the potential consequences for network unity, for overall development focus, for the very nature of decentralization, if a significant number of users were to actually switch away from the main Bitcoin Core client? While it's definitely a powerful demonstration of decentralization in action, users having a real choice in their software, too much fragmentation could also introduce serious new complexities. It could make achieving network-wide consensus much harder. It might lead to increased transaction complexities, maybe delays, or even, in the most extreme scenario, a contentious chain split if the ideological and technical divergence just becomes too severe. Crowder clearly views this risk as necessary, maybe a lesser of two evils, to prevent what he sees as the corruption of Bitcoin. But it's a risk with potentially far-reaching implications for Bitcoin's future cohesion and even the shared understanding of what constitutes Bitcoin.
and connecting it back to sovereignty.
Yeah, if we connect this whole call to action back to the fundamental idea of running your own node to achieve sovereignty and resist corporate developer capture, we see how deeply this links back to Bitcoin's founding principles. Crowder is essentially arguing that these principles are under direct threat right now, and that individual user action through their informed choice of software and their active participation is the ultimate and perhaps the only defense against that perceived threat. It reframes the user not just as a passive consumer of the technology, but as a crucial guardian of its original vision and integrity. It transforms their technical choice into an act of ideological, almost political, assertion within the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Okay, we've really journeyed through Crowder's compelling, albeit intensely controversial, account of what he frames as nothing less than a civil war raging inside Bitcoin. It's been a deep dive into these allegations of a problematic software update, the really disturbing potential for illegal content, the alleged financial motives he believes are driving these changes, and those intense personal attacks that have, in his view, just poisoned the whole debate. We've also explored his perspective on how a growing segment of the community is apparently pushing back and his urgent call for action. Let's try and synthesize all of this now and clearly lay out from Crowder's perspective the two warring factions in this battle for Bitcoin's identity.
Indeed. Crowder's entire piece really culminates in this powerful, almost epical metaphor, a civil war inside Bitcoin. He's not just describing a technical disagreement here. He's portraying an existential struggle with clear opposing sides, each fighting for a fundamentally distinct vision of Bitcoin's future. It's a battle, as he frames it, for defining the very essence of this revolutionary technology, a battle he paints almost as good versus evil for the future of decentralized money.
So, who is on side one, according to him?
On one side, Crowder places who he describes as core developers, big companies, and influencers profiting from spam. This faction, in his narrative, is depicted as having these clear financial and maybe status-driven motives for fundamentally changing Bitcoin's function. They are, in his telling, the agents of change, pushing for a version of Bitcoin that doesn't just tolerate, but actively accommodates inscriptions, NFTs, and other forms of what he calls non-monetary data. Their alleged profits, as we discussed, stem from various activities. Mining blocks packed with inscriptions, like he claims Marathon does, creating and selling Bitcoin-based NFTs, like Taproot Wizards, or making strategic investments in these new schemes, as he alleges with David Bailey. Crowder argues their motivations aren't purely about ideological preference or technical purity. He believes they're deeply intertwined with economic gain, the pursuit of new business models, maybe a desire to maintain or increase influence within this evolving Bitcoin ecosystem. He sees them as prioritizing commercial expansion over foundational principles, effectively trying to privatize block space for profit. Okay, on the other side, the defenders. On the other side, Crowder champions the grassroots Bitcoiners, miners, and alternative software, like Knots, fighting to keep Bitcoin's focus on being money. This side is portrayed as the staunch defender of Bitcoin's original, maybe pristine vision. They are the individual users proactively running Bitcoin Knots nodes, specifically configured to resist what they view as spam. They are the miners dedicating their hash rate to pools like Ocean that signal a preference for a cleaner protocol prioritizing monetary transactions. And critically, they represent what Crowder asserts is the vast majority of users who simply want Bitcoin to remain sound money, a pure monetary system, unburdened by extraneous data or distracting commercial schemes. Their motivations, as framed by Crowder, are all about ideological purity, a steadfast loyalty to Satoshi's foundational principles, a deep-seated resistance to what they perceive as corruption, and a fundamental departure from the values that initially made Bitcoin valuable and compelling. They are fighting, in essence, for Bitcoin's soul, trying to reverse the rot that he claims began in 2023.
And his final warning, if things don't change.
His dire warning, should this trajectory remain unchecked, is stark. Bitcoin risks being corrupted into a spam-ridden system that serves corporate interests while exposing individuals to legal and reputational dangers. This isn't just a prediction of technical issues like clogged blocks or higher fees. It's a warning of profound moral and ethical decay. He fears it could fundamentally alter Bitcoin's utility, erode public trust in its integrity, and ultimately undermine its very purpose as a trusted, decentralized monetary system. For him, the battle transcends just bandwidth or block space. It's about the very soul and the long-term viability of arguably the most prominent decentralized network in the world, threatening to turn a potential tool of freedom into one of liability and corporate control.
It really sounds like he sees Bitcoin at a critical crossroads.
Absolutely. This entire narrative highlights what he sees as a critical juncture for Bitcoin, where its identity, its fundamental purpose aren't just passively evolving anymore. They're being actively, almost violently contested between these two distinct visions. The long-term implications of such a profound ideological split could deeply impact Bitcoin's future development path, its widespread adoption by new users, and how it's perceived by the wider global public. If the network becomes too fragmented, or if its core principles are seen to be irreversibly compromised by commercial interests or just internal strife, well, it could undermine the very trust, scarcity, and censorship resistance that underpin its entire value proposition, potentially leading to a decline in its unique standing in the whole digital asset space.
And those risks for users again.
Yeah, just to reiterate those critical potential risks outlined by Crowder. Everything from technical degradation, which could lead to higher costs and slower confirmation times for simple monetary transactions, all the way to those severe legal liabilities for individual node operators, due to the potential for unknowingly relaying illegal content. These factors could profoundly affect the very users the technology was supposed to empower with financial sovereignty. It threatens to transform a visionary technology, initially designed to offer liberation and financial self-determination, into something potentially hazardous, costly, and legally fraught for its most dedicated participants. This is, in Crowder's view, a moment requiring profound introspection and maybe decisive action for the Bitcoin community to determine its path forward. Hashtag tag outro.
So we've journeyed through Crowder's compelling, yes, but definitely controversial, account of what he frames as nothing less than a civil war raging within Bitcoin. We've laid bare his claims about a problematic software update, the really disturbing potential for illegal content, the alleged financial motives he believes are driving these changes, and those intense personal attacks that have, in his view, just poisoned the very wellspring of the debate. We've also explored his perspective on how a growing segment of the community seems to be pushing back and his urgent call for action. It's definitely a complex, multifaceted dispute that really challenges our understanding of how decentralized governance actually works, or doesn't work.
Yeah, just deep dive into Crowder's perspective. When you really get down to it, it's far more than just a technical dispute over data storage on a blockchain, isn't it? It serves as this vivid case study in the inherent challenges of decentralized governance, or maybe the vacuum of governance, when faced with powerful, conflicting incentives. It really exposes the profound power financial interests can have in shaping technological evolution, often in very subtle ways. And it illuminates the immense difficulties in just maintaining foundational principles within a rapidly evolving technological landscape. Ultimately, it kind of forces us, and maybe you listening, to confront these broader universal themes. Digital sovereignty, the complexities of community self-regulation, that constant struggle against information overload, even when that information is supposedly inscribed on an immutable ledger. It's almost a microcosm of the larger digital world we all inhabit now, demonstrating how even the most supposedly robust systems are still shaped by human decisions, human conflicts, and powerful economic forces.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. In a truly decentralized system like Bitcoin, when a fundamental civil war like this erupts and its very identity is so fiercely contested, who ultimately does have the authority to decide its true purpose? Is it developers, miners, users, market forces? And what does the answer to that question mean for the future, not just for Bitcoin, but perhaps for all decentralized technologies that rely on some kind of shared, yet maybe always contested vision? Something to definitely consider as you continue to navigate and perhaps participate in this ever-evolving world of digital assets and decentralized communities.